I joined the Foreign Service in 1963, and I spent 33 years in the Foreign Service, gradually working my way up the ladders. And my first ambassadorship was to Guyana. I was appointed by President Reagan. That would have been like in the early 1990s. And then my last one was an appointment by President Clinton in, when would that be, about 93. And that was to Brunei in Southeast Asia. I was always, even as a little child, very interested in what was going on in the world. My father was, he was a councilman in our town, the mayor of the town, and then later a freeholder, which for our county, was like a county commissioner, kind of run the county. And we would sit around the dinner table and talk about what was going on in the world. I remember that very distinctly. My father died when I was 10 years old, so I'm pulling memories back from a long time, but it really planted seeds that there was more to the country than the small town I came from. That was a nice little town in New Jersey, Runnymede, New Jersey. Had nothing, it was a nice little town to grow up in. But, it had borders, and I was interested in looking beyond those borders. And at one point, let's see, I was going to night school because we didn't have the economic means to go to college. My father had passed away, and this was before Pell Grants and student loans and all of that routine. So I was going to night school in Camden, at Rutgers University in Camden. And I happened to read an article in Good Housekeeping magazine, of all things, and it was a blurb that the State Department had put in. And we're talking probably 1960, something like that, in which they were talking about careers for women in the Foreign Service and how the State Department, was reaching out and hoping to encourage women to participate and get more interested in Foreign Service work. And the woman they had interviewed, a young Foreign Service officer, made it clear that it wasn't just being a secretary. That's what I was doing in the daytime. I was a secretary for 10 years after high school. But it wasn't necessarily secretarial work. You could aspire, you could become a Foreign Service officer. I thought, oh, all right. So I sent away for information, and that was my goal, was to make it in the Foreign Service. And this was accomplished by means of, each year, the State Department has a Foreign Service examination, a lengthy written examination, given once a year. So I took that and passed it. So the next step then was an oral examination. So if you pass both of these exams, then there's the security check and, health and all that routine. Now, I had to go through the examination process twice. I passed the written examination, no problem whatsoever. But at that point, I only had the equivalent of maybe 60, 65 college credits. So I went up to New York to our mission to the United Nations to take the oral exam. And I was encouraged by a college professor friend of mine who says, "You'll be fine. You've passed the oral. It's just, they just want to see you don't have two heads and that you can answer some questions and speak coherently." Well, the panel, a three-person panel, they really asked quite an array of questions, well across the board. And if I couldn't answer them, I'm sorry, I don't know, And they lamented the fact that I had not had any economic courses yet in college. But they also said they couldn't really, they were impressed by the fact that with such little formal education, I had done so well on the written exam. So they encouraged me to try it again, which meant I had to start from scratch and go over the whole thing, take the written test, which is only given once a year. And I was really crushed, but I will say my mother, who gets tremendous credit, she just insisted, she says, take the test again. They told you to try again. And, what do you have to lose? A day's vacation? Go ahead and do it. So I did. I said, okay, I'll do it, but it's just to prove that passing the first time wasn't a fluke. And so I took it again, passed it, and then I wasn't going to bother signing up for the oral exam. And my mother said, again, what do you have to lose? Blah, blah, blah. Anyway, do it. So she really encouraged me. So I, again, went up to New York for the oral exam, which was, I have to tell you, rather different from the first one. It went along the lines that my college professor friend thought it would. More general statements and how would you handle if you had an opportunity to interview de Gaulle or somebody like that. It's a very interesting thing. And at the end of it, I thought, well, I've gone through this now. They know I'm serious, but they welcomed me into the Foreign Service. So that's how I got in. And over the course of the next several years, anytime I had an opportunity, I would take courses at night. If I were stationed in the United States, I would take courses at night and finish the degree. So I ended up with a bachelor's degree from the University of Maryland, which has a very extensive night school program, basically all around the world. And then later, the State Department, after I'd had a tour or two, they sent me to the University of Michigan, where I earned a master's degree in Southeast Asian Studies. But I really love the work. I love the job. And it was just kind of a progression up the ladder. President Clinton then appointed me ambassador to Brunei in I retired in about 1993. But my first chief of mission position came a bit earlier. I was permanent chargé d'affaires in Laos, and that would have been from about 85 to 88, something like that. Chargé d'affaires at an embassy is the person who's in charge when there is no ambassador. Now, if there is an ambassador and the ambassador goes away, leaves country, then the number 2 person, the deputy chief of mission, becomes chargé d'affaires. In the case of Laos, we did not have relations at the ambassadorial level, so I was what they call permanent chargé d'affaires. I was in that position for 3 years. Subsequently, several years later, our relations improved, and we appointed an ambassador. So for the last maybe 10 years or so, there's been an ambassador. But the chargé has all of the responsibilities and perks of an ambassador. So basically, chief of mission is the phrase. I was chief of mission 3 times. When there is a change of presidents, all of the sitting ambassadors have to submit their resignation to the president. Now, I was ambassador to Guyana when, let me see, who appointed me? Reagan appointed me. Okay, Reagan appointed me ambassador, and then he was replaced by his vice president, George H.W. Bush came in, and as all ambassadors, I had to submit a formal resignation to the new president. And he then considered it, and basically what they do in these cases, they usually keep the bulk of the ambassadors in place, and there's just maybe 20% or so of the more important, bigger posts that they change, particularly if there's a pretty substantial fund donor who would like to serve, say, in some of these nicer posts, the more pleasant ones. But anyway, my resignation was declined by President Bush, and I remained in place. You're completely in charge of all U.S. activities in the country, unless there is an ongoing war, in which case you don't override the senior military person. You coordinate closely, but you do not. You don't go out and give orders to divisions and fleets, but you're in charge of everything else. Okay, so your job is to, putting it simply, you have to represent the United States and convey the positions of your president to the host government, the heads of government in the country to which you're assigned, and you obtain from your discussions and analysis of the situation what the views and interests and desires are of the country to which you're assigned. And you report that back to Washington and do what you can then to further U.S. interest. In recent years, part of those interests have involved the ambassador being sort of a business person, representing U.S. business interests, encouraging host countries to look favorably upon U.S. contractors who are looking for business in that country. When I was ambassador to Brunei, for example, it was a very wealthy country, and they were considering certain upgrades to their military forces, as small as they are. But so I had to basically lobby the Sultan of Brunei and his people, but personally the Sultan, who made the major decisions on the sale, for example, of Black Hawk helicopters to his armed forces, also the sale of Boeing aircraft, things of that nature. And you know, say looking at Brunei in particular, one way to encourage closer relations was to encourage relations to be strengthened and furthered through military contacts. So we brought U.S. ships into port to visit, goodwill visits, you know, they would come in and interact with the Bruneian military. And it worked out, you know, very, very nicely. And the same thing held true when I was ambassador to Guyana. The countries were very different from each other, Brunei being extremely wealthy and Guyana being extremely poor. And the difference was that in Guyana, there had been some hostile relations between the U.S. and Guyana. Not, you know, no breach of relations, but for a sustained period, they had a president who was not too favorably inclined toward the U.S. He abolished the U.S. aid program, which the country desperately needed, for example, but sort of in a peak. He was very, very far left, and, you know, cozied up a lot to Cuba and the Soviets and people like that. But he died on the operating table at the hands of, you know, completely innocently, at the hands of a Cuban physician, because Cubans had a big staff of doctors and nurses in Guyana helping out. So he died, and his replacement was much more mellow when it came to dealing with the U.S. So military contacts was one way that we were able to get involved and to strengthen, rebuild the relationship. It had been a very good relationship, but we gradually tried to rebuild it that way through well drilling teams that come in and go to remote villages and dig wells, and health groups, units that would come in and vaccinate kids and things of that nature. And then we had joint operations, training operations with Guyanese troops and our own, coming in from various areas. So it was very interesting, together with ship visits and things of that nature. Now in Guyana, we also were able to restore what they call Public Law 480 program, where we were able to import, well, I guess it would be flour, to import flour, which they would then bake into bread, because that was a program that the previous president there had eliminated, and people were reduced to eating cassava, baked cassava crackers. And so it was a very interesting time, Also in Guyana, one of the things that we were very much involved in was helping the Guyanese work their way through an economic restructuring program with the International Monetary Fund. And that was quite a project, very, very, very interesting, to gather together funds from various countries, including a very modest contribution from the U.S., but everything was appreciated, and they were able to get through that program and make significant improvement in their economic situation, get away from the complete socialist domination that they had had. But that type of program has to be followed through. And after the several years, they had a very genuinely free election and elected a communist who was very half-hearted about the program, so it kind of limped along. But Guyana is still better off now than it was when I first went there, and that would have been in the early 90s that I went to Guyana. But at any rate, no. So that you have a range of things to do. You also oversee. You have a consular section that gives visas for people wishing to visit the United States or to immigrate there, and you are available to help Americans in distress who fall into difficulty in your country. There's a range of economic, political, as well as service issues that you get involved with, citizen services, things of that nature. I was just very much geared toward international affairs, politics, how our own country's politics evolve, with my father being involved as he was at a local level. And in that case, I just was absolutely entranced with the idea that, gee, foreign service, that'd be great. And the honor, frankly, of representing the United States abroad. That just meant a tremendous amount to me. I was just so honored and grateful to have been given the opportunity to represent my country abroad. I just think it's a great country. We're going through some rough times now, but we'll get through them. We've had rough times before. But I just hope that young people, male or female, can give serious thought. How do they want to spend 20, 30 years of their working life, and kind of orient themselves toward it. Teaching, government work, there's a whole range of opportunities in government, not just being a diplomat like I was, but working in, say, security issues and things of that nature. It's just fascinating. There are many good opportunities out there, but you have to work hard, you have to be prepared to work hard, and you can't go into it for the money. Because the private sector is always going to pay more if you really develop the good skills, the education and the skills. You'll make out so much better in the private sector, but I don't think you'll get the satisfaction. I mean, if you rise up, as I was fortunate enough to do, you'll make a decent living.